Today, we're diving into the science behind the DUI breathalyzer. You know, it's a machine whose results can literally change a person's life in a single moment. And it all seems pretty simple, right? Well, we're about to find out how one of the most fundamental laws of chemistry might actually fail the test when it's up against the messy reality of the human body. You've probably heard that command in movies, maybe even in real life. It's a moment that's just dripping with tension. The officer almost sounds like a coach, pushing you to give just a little bit more, a little more air. Because it turns out there is a surprising amount of really complex science packed into that one breath sample. And, well, not all of it is as black and white as you'd think. We're going to open up that little black box and see what's actually going on inside. So here's the plan. First, we're going to look at the single biggest assumption the machine makes. Then we'll check out three key things that mess with that assumption: the volume of your breath and the impact of pressure and temperature. And finally, we'll see how all of that can add up to a potential scientific error that is, frankly, huge. Okay, so let's get right to the heart of it. Every single breath test result, the number it spits out, it all hinges on a scientific principle that was discovered more than 200 years ago. Yeah, the whole system is built on this one single foundation. And this is it, Avogadro's law. It's a cornerstone of chemistry class, but I want you to pay really close attention to those conditions at the same temperature and pressure. See, the breathalyzer is built on the idea that every single person's breath sample is identical in those two ways. And as we're about to see, that is a massive assumption when you're dealing with human beings. So Avogadro's law gives the machine its basic framework. But to do the actual math, it needs another rule. That's where Henry's law comes in. Just think of a can of soda. Henry's law basically says you can guess how much sugar is in the liquid just by measuring the fizz in the air above it. The breathalyzer does the exact same thing. It guesses the alcohol in your blood by measuring the alcohol vapor in your breath, and it uses a fixed conversion factor to do it. And this is that conversion factor. It's called the partition ratio. The machine is programmed, hard-coded, with a fixed ratio: 2,100 parts of alcohol vapor in your lung air for every 1 part of alcohol in your blood. But here's the kicker. Independent medical research found that the average ratio in actual humans is closer to 1756 to 1. Now, that's not a small difference. That is a major discrepancy, baked right into the machine's most basic logic. Which brings us right back to that command we started with: keep blowing. Turns out there's a very specific, very scientific reason they want you to do that. So here's the deal. The machine isn't trying to measure the air in your mouth or your throat. Nope. It's designed to measure alcohol vapor from the deepest part of your lungs because that's where it's most concentrated. So the longer and harder you blow, the more of that deep lung air gets pushed into the machine. And research shows this can actually change your personal partition ratio in that moment, which can lead to a higher final reading. Put simply, more volume can mean a higher number. Okay, so if measuring the volume is that important, you would hope the part of the machine that does it is flawless, right? Well, a review of over 200 of these machines down in Florida found that 40%, 40, of their pressure transducers, the very part that measures breath volume, were recording it incorrectly. So this is where a scientific problem becomes a very real mechanical one. All right, next up, we've got two variables that are totally linked: pressure and temperature. And this really gets to the core problem. Avogadro's law is perfect for gases in a lab, under perfect constant conditions. But a person is not a machine that operates at a fixed temperature and pressure. The physics here is pretty simple. When you are forcing air out of your lungs under pressure, you actually change the temperature of that air as it moves into the machine. And remember Avogadro's law? It needs constant temperature and constant pressure. We already have two things changing before the sample is even finished. And as it turns out, temperature has a direct and measurable effect on the final number. And the effect is not small. Just look at this. Research confirmed that for every 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit your body temperature is above normal, the breath test result can jump by about 7%. I mean, think about that for a second. A slight low-grade fever, one you might not even feel, could be the difference between a reading of, say, 0.075 and a legally damning 0.08. So let's pull all this together. We've looked at these different variables one by one: the ratio, the volume, the temperature. But now let's stack them up and see what the real cumulative effect could be. Okay, first, let's start with that fundamental assumption, that partition ratio. Remember, the machine uses 2,100 to 1. But if the medical research showing an average of 1756 to 1 is more accurate for how humans actually work, then the machine's formula, right off the bat, is calculating your result to be about 17% higher than it might be in reality. That's our starting point for error. Okay, now on top of that 17%, let's layer on the fever factor we just talked about. If a person has even that slight 1.8-degree fever, we have to add another 7% of potential error to the total. And when you add those together, the 17% from the ratio and the 7% from the fever, you get a potential overreporting of nearly 25%. And that's not even counting other variables like breath pressure. This means a reading that shows up as a 0.08 could, scientifically, represent a true value that's actually closer to 0.06. So what's the big takeaway here? It's that the breathalyzer is a scientific instrument, and just like any instrument, it's subject to variables, to assumptions, and to margins of error. It is not some magical, infallible black box that gives you a perfect, undeniable number. It's a machine, and it's making a really sensitive calculation based on scientific laws that just don't map perfectly onto the wild complexities of human biology. And that leaves us with one last, really crucial question to think about, because this isn't just a science experiment. The numbers these machines spit out have profound, life-altering consequences for real people, which really makes you wonder, when the stakes are that high, what's an acceptable margin of error? How perfect does the science truly need to be?